Oh, well, hello there. Welcome back. Okay, so let's start with our next subject as we continue looking at cultural anthropology. So, about the specifics of cultural anthropology, um, early cultural anthropologists were oftentimes interested in looking at the rare and exotic. And I'll be honest, I kind of hate the word exotic. I think it puts a spin on cultural behaviors, cultural um, individuals, different people, the things that they do, and it doesn't allow us to appreciate and respect those different cultures, right? But it's one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing as early anthropologists is looking for those things that were fascinating and weird, right? Now we look at it in a more holistic way, like culturally, what is happening here? How do we understand it? So we're looking at those things, the rare and exotic. Now we're looking at more diverse, encompassing things. One of the things that we're also looking at a lot of is not only just other cultures, but also understanding our own. Why do we do the things that we do, right? A lot of times we're looking at other cultures, but to really understand another culture, a lot of times you have to understand your own. Like, where are you coming from? What are your biases? What makes your thought patterns important? And when you look at another culture and you say, well, that seems silly, right? That seems weird. Why? Why do you think of it as being silly or weird? Why would you think like that, right? Because you grew up in a particular culture that might not have done those things. And if it doesn't make sense, they can be, strange or sometimes scary. And if we can understand why we think that way, when we look at other cultures and we see what they're doing, we can be like, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why I think that way. And now I've got a better chance of understanding that other culture through examining my own bias, right? So that's important to kind of understand about culture. So normally I like to do, if we were in person, we would be doing this exercise in which we'd get into groups and sort of discuss different things. But what I want you to do, because you're probably home alone or in a coffee shop or wherever you're doing this, I want you to sit down. I want you to think about why it's important to understand your own culture so that you can understand another culture. What is it that allows us to help us understand that? What are the reasons why we would want to do that thing? And then what are the benefits of understanding other cultures? Like what do we get out of it? So what I want you to do is pause here and write something down, okay? Write down a couple ideas why it's important to understand your own culture to better understand another, and then what are the benefits of that. So pause. Okay, hopefully you've paused and done that. Let's continue and look at some answers, right? So to understand other cultures and why we should, understand our own, there's lots of different reasons. Primarily, it's so that we can have a template, right? If we understand our own culture, we can create a template for understanding why, right? Why do we use money as a means of exchange for goods? Not everybody uses money, which seems like a crazy idea. Like, why? How would you exchange? How do you know the value of something, right? And that gets down to the question, what do we consider valuable? And how do we arrange that? And why do we need money? Right? That's an interesting question. So we would look at those kinds of ideas, right? And when we look at ourselves and understand those things, and then we look at those other cultures, and they don't seem so strange if we can start to understand why they might do the things that they do. So, for example, let's take a look at, we've got a couple of nuns here with head coverings, right? And so in years past, we've had issues. It's even gone in front of governmental entities. France was trying to do this a few years ago, where they were trying to outlaw wearing like a hijab or a burqa, okay? And they felt that there were legitimate reasons why people shouldn't do that, right? And if we look at things from our own point of view, and we look at, say, some traditional Muslim garments, and we say, well, you know, there's oppression involved. There's this patriarchal oppression. And yeah, there's some of that. That's true. In some places. In other places around the world that does this, there isn't. It's become tradition. Not everyone wants to do that. And some people want to wear that. They don't want to have their faces or their hair exposed. It gives them a sense of anonymity. There's lots of reasons. There's practical reasons why people do this. And that's one of the things that we have to understand, is that oftentimes through cultural practices, there are practical reasons why people do the things that they do, right? So here we look at you know, these different head coverings, body coverings, and we say, well, these are cultural and religious practices, right? But could there possibly be a practical reason? And we look at this, okay, if we look at, say, Islam, and we look at these types of garments, one of the things that you have to understand is that some of these folks come from deserts where there's lots of sand, and sand gets everywhere. And so if you can protect yourself from sand, you might wear a garment that would do so. And if this is where these religions are originating from, and these garments are used in a practical sense, maybe we can understand the practical reasons why these cultural and religious ideas grab hold and maintain themselves, right? We can say, oh, yeah, so this person did this, and now I get why. Now I understand that there could be a reason why this was taking place. And then people move away, and they go to other places, and they take those traditions with them. So there might not be a practical reason for them to wear it in that new location, but it's got that historical and cultural legacy that it takes with it, right? So when we look at those kinds of garments and we look, or other practices, a lot of times there is usually a practical reason behind it. And so that's one of the things that we look for, are those practical reasons. What are some of the things that we can learn from other cultures and benefit from? Well, there's lots of things, right? The joys of diversity. As I think I said before, I'm a giant nerd, right? I love things like Star Trek and Game of Thrones and Star Wars and just science fiction in general. If we didn't have diversity, we wouldn't have any of those things. Right? If we didn't have diversity of culture, diversity of thought, diversity of language, those things would no longer exist. And it's because we wouldn't have anything to draw upon. So that sort of creativeness, that, you know, that diversity, that all of those wonderful things that bring the outside world into our own lives, right? It makes us better, it gives us more perspective. When we add new languages and cultures to our own, it also gives us perspective, right? We talked about that before. It gives us, allows us to see the world through someone else's shoes, right? We can explore the world and learn about the world, but through a totally different perspective, a totally different truth, right? Perspective is really important to understand. And this is something that we'll be talking a lot about throughout the rest of the semester, is this idea of perspective, okay? We're going to be talking a lot about truth and fact, okay? And another way that I like to put it is theoretical truth and ground truth. So here's the thing, right? Truth and fact are two different things. Let's say you're religious, right? You might be Muslim, you might be Buddhist, you might be Christian. And when you talk about your truth, your life, it's rooted in truth. Then you meet someone else from another religion and they tell you about their religion and their truth, right? And you're like, no. That's not true. What I believe in is true, right? And they're like, no. What you believe in is crap. What I believe in is true. You see the problem, right? We're perceiving the world from different points of view. Those truths are not false. You believe in that particular thing. You're not lying about it. You're not telling falsehoods. You are telling your truth, your perspective about how the world works. But they're doing the same thing. They're not wrong. They are seeing the world through their own ways. Now, you don't have to agree, right? You're just seeing two different truths that are being experienced by those different individuals. Now you throw in fact. And fact and truth don't have to correspond either, right? You might believe something, but it might not be rooted in fact of like gravity, right? Gravity is a fact. But your truth might not sit there in fact. So to put it another way, let's say as an anthropologist, we look back, let's take one of our original, one of the fathers of American anthropology, Franz Boas. He worked with the Inuit around the Arctic Circle. And some of his earliest works was working with these different tribes. And he would record these ethnographies about these folks. Now, he created a theory about how these people lived. He experienced that. Okay, that's that theoretical truth. Now, if I were to go and live with those same people, I would read that book first, and I'd see, okay, here's the theoretical truth. But now me, 80 years after Boas wrote those original ethnographies, if I go there, that truth is now different, right? Because now it's been 80 years. Things have changed. Excuse me. So the theoretical truth and the ground truth are no longer the same, right? So that's something that we have to keep in mind when we're looking at other cultures, when we're looking at perspective. Okay, continuing on. We've got creativity. Experience is the food for creativity. The more experience we have, the better off we're going to be when it comes to gaining perspective, right? One of the best things you can do as an American is leave America. Travel. Go around the world. Go to Mexico. Go to Brazil. Go to Europe. Go to Kenya or South Africa or Zimbabwe. Or to Russia, or to any of these places around the world that you can get into, mind you, and experience life there, experience the people there, gain perspective, because there's a lot of perspective out there. Actually, I met a retired Marine sergeant a couple years ago, and we were having this conversation, and she said that the most important thing that ever happened to her in her career and in her life was leaving the United States and traveling. And I was kind of awed by that answer, because it's all about gaining that perspective, about looking at all the different peoples that you're going to meet, and when you get to know them and get to experience them, guess what? Right? It's a lot easier to make friends than it is to make enemies. Right? Go out there, talk to them, get to know them. Really important. And that's a big thing, right? If we understand our neighbors, we're less likely to go to war with them. If we can understand the things that they find culturally important, we can adjust to that. We can work with them. We can find a bridge to get to someplace. That's really important to understand. Beyond everything else, most important thing is food, right? Obviously, food. Right? If we didn't have the diversity of food, I mean, I love being able to go downtown and find different, 20 different ethnic foods that I can experiment with, that I can try, I can learn something new about the flavor of a different country, about the food that they eat, about how they prepare it. You know, when I was in Kenya, I got a chance to go to this little village called Shirazi. And in that village, we were just getting ready to leave and head back home to the States. And so they're like, hey, we want to throw a party and just have everybody show up, and, you know, we'll have a good time. We'll make a big meal, and, you know, the entire village is going to show up. There's going to be like 50 people here. We're like, yeah, sure, let's do that. Sounds like fun. And so to do that, we had to slaughter a goat. And me, I grew up in Golden, Colorado, right? And I grew up where if I wanted meat, if I wanted, you know, if I was going to cook something, I'd just go to King Soopers and, you know, I'd go hunting in the meat aisle. So for this, it was a really interesting experience because I got to help slaughter and process this goat that in about half an hour, we were going to be cooking and eating. And it was an interesting perspective to think about our relationship to food, right? Do we see food, right? I remember reading, it was an article a number of years ago where they were talking about how elementary age school children believe that chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Not just milk, but chocolate milk. Chocolate milk comes from brown cows. Right? Now, if any of those kids had ever worked on a farm and milked a cow, they would know that that's not the case. But they don't, right? A lot of these kids grew up in an urban area where, you know, they might have seen a cow, and if they'd gone to a farm or to a rodeo, they might see a cow in person, but it's rare that they're going to actually see a cow. So that sort of cultural entanglement, you know, is missing. So understanding our relationship to our food, right, and to how other people deal with that food and the importance of that, right? Okay. All right, so we're going to pause here, and then we'll start up again with another video. All right, we will talk to you in a few.